All right. And everyone can hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So welcome to Intro to Coding Live, April 17th through May 4th, 2023. Uh, my name is Charles Kubiak. I'm going to be the instructor for that. We'll get a little bit more into my story here in a little bit. Uh, we're going to record each of these sessions. Each session is going to be roughly around 3 hours long. The first session tonight is going to be really long for me because I will be talking pretty much nonstop for the 3 hours tonight. We'll take some breaks. We're not going to get our hands too dirty tonight. This is going to be me covering a lot of the core concepts, and we'll always be swinging back around. There's going to be repetition. Things that we're going to struggle with tonight are going to be a breeze for you next week, and then the week after that, you're going to be on to bigger and better things. I will say, um, the sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So yes, bigger and better things, and let's go ahead and keep the slides moving because there are a lot of them for the first night, and that's what I was going to say. So basically 3 hours of me talking tonight, and then after that it's going to typically be about 45 minutes to an hour of me talking each night for all of the classes after this. And we're going to get into basically how we're going to handle tackling challenges, if we're going to want to do pairs, or if we're going to do group, basically what we refer to as mobs, where it's 3 or 4 people paired off on it. Or there's also going to be plenty of times where I walk the entire class through a challenge, and we'll just kind of ask questions so we keep it moving forward. All right. And Michael, yeah, will we get copies of the slide after this? Yes, absolutely. I've already PDF'd it. So once we get through some of this, probably tonight, I'll drop a copy of the challenges and the PDF in there. I'm pretty sure I updated all the dates that I needed to, but if I miss any, some of the dates may be a little bit off in there, but that's just because the slides get recycled. But hopefully we'll be good to go tonight. All right. So quick quote, to me, programming is more than an important practical art. It is also a gigantic undertaking in the foundations of knowledge. Right. So before we started recording, I was answering someone's question. We were kind of talking about uh, like basically like being able to play a musical instrument, so to read sheet music and then translate like your hands, your mouth, something like whatever instrument you play. uh you're reading something, you're reading basically a code, and then you're translating that into actions with your body. So like for those of you that can play a musical instrument, you've actually got a leg up when it comes to learning and writing code, because you're going to be taking code that you see on the screen and you're going to be making your hands input it on the keyboard. Right. And so that was not something that I was aware of until I tried to learn how to code, and I have this much musical ability. I can't sing, I can screech, and I can only work uh, some of the fingers on this hand, not all of them, from nerve damage. So I can't play any musical instruments more technical than banging two rocks together. And that's why I was in the infantry in the Marine Corps, because that was pretty much what I was good at, was banging rocks together. Um, so about me, so I am the volunteer coordinator and also the Intro to Coding Live instructor, or one of the instructors. Now we've hired a second one to teach Python at Code Platoon. And my day job, I'm a senior software crafter at A-Flight. I've been there since May of 2019 through present. I went through Code Platoon immediately before that. So I graduated in Hotel Platoon, and I think we're wrapping up Tango Platoon, or maybe Uniform Platoon. So a few years ago now. And I graduated from Code Platoon. A month later, I got placed at a company called A-Flight, which is a custom software company here in Chicago, Illinois. I went as a paid apprentice, which was like a 6-month apprenticeship or internship. Graduated from that, got hired full-time at Eighth Light as a software crafter. And then after a few years of doing that, I got promoted to senior software crafter. And now I'm also a people manager. So I manage 3 or 4 developers depending on what's going on. And so like the next step for me will most likely be moving into like some sort of a delivery or like lead position where I'll still be writing code, but I'll also be managing projects and managing people. Prior to all of that, I was a Marine Corps veteran. So I was in from 2001 to 2005. Went to boot camp the day before the World Trade Center. Went through MCRD San Diego, got out, did infantry school, went to my unit, and then promptly went over for the invasion of Iraq in 03. Came back at the end of that summer, beginning of fall, got a Christmas briefing saying have fun on leave when you come back. We're going back to Iraq next year. And I went back to Iraq from August of 04 into May, June of 05. And then basically got back in June of 05 and started all my wrap up stuff. And with my terminal leave, I got out in July of 05 and immediately went into finance, finished up my bachelor's degree in finance and management. Worked at Charles Schwab, worked at Chase Bank. I was a stockbroker. I was a derivative sales. I ran a hedge fund for a few years and just got really, really burnt out on finance and wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Went back to the VA and did their compensated work therapy, which is basically just fancy talk for getting a VA guidance counselor because I figured out what I wanted to do when I grow up. And they kept trying to say like, hey, well, you can go work for a bank, you can work for an insurance company if you don't want to work for stock brokerage firms anymore. I was like, none of that. Like I was like dry heaving in the seat thinking about working at insurance companies or going back to a bank again. And had like a few phone calls with him. And then I finally went into his office and on his cubicle wall, he had a flyer for Code Platoon. I was like, what's that? He's like, well, that's different than what you're doing now. I was like, let's do that. And so went home in August of what 2019 or 2018. Taught myself enough JavaScript. They didn't have intro to coding back when I went through. Basically hopped on freecodecamp.org, taught myself enough JavaScript to apply for Code Platoon at the end of September, got accepted, and basically January 2019, since then I've been working towards continuing to learn how to code. Best way to get a hold of me is on Slack. I've already talked to a few of you on Slack, but it's just at Charles. You'll pull me up. I'm on Slack. You can also email me. So the charles@codeplatoon.org, or you can respond to the email that I sent to you if you've got any questions. But hopefully at this point, everyone is in the intro to coding Slack channel. And if you're not, feel free to let me know. You can drop me a message here and with your email address, and I will send you a fresh invite. But I will say, your invite most likely is in your spam folder, especially if you're like at Gmail. It's either in the update folder or the spam folder, but I will resend it for you if need be. But being in the intro to coding Slack channel will be a big help as you go through this. So a little bit about Code Platoon. So Code Platoon is a 501c3 nonprofit coding bootcamp for veterans and military spouses. So you've been in the military, or your spouse has been in the military, and you're basically, that's pretty much the only pre-qualification to go to Code Platoon. 14 weeks, students are immersed in learning full stack web development, including Python, which is a core language, Django, which is a framework for running backend servers in the Python language, JavaScript, which is a core language, React, which is a framework for running front-end servers, so basically everything you see on your screen in JavaScript, and then HTML and CSS, which is kind of the window dressing on what you're looking at on your screen. And so you learn all of it, basically front to back, on how to program a modern web application. After completing the program, the veteran and military spouse will be hireable as a junior full stack web developer and eligible for an internship through one of the host companies that partners with Code Platoon. And this is, there's lots of coding boot camps out there. Some of them are better than others. Code Platoon is a great one. They're not the only great one out there, depending on how things work out for you with timing and all this other stuff. But one of the things I will say that sets Code Platoon apart from a lot of its competitors is the ability to do the internships or apprenticeships. A lot of coding camps will have like employment, like support services afterwards, but a lot of it is just like, all right, you graduated. I mean, let us know if we can do anything else to help you. Code Platoon actually networks. A lot of it is in the Chicago area, but as the world has decentralized, so has the network of sponsors that basically buy in every cohort to have an opportunity to basically take on a Code Platoon student as an intern. And these companies are all looking, for the most part, to extend that internship into full-time employment. And that's what happened for me. It's what happens for Code Platoon students every cycle. Some people aren't necessarily interested in the internship program. Some people will not be able to make it work because I know some, not all of them, but some companies require that like you're in or around Chicago. Like I know one of the corporate sponsors is like JP Morgan Chase. And if anyone's heard any thought pieces by Jamie Dimon, he's very much on the return for office. And so something along those lines, like you may find yourself in a more static, a geographically static position where you've got to work near Chase versus other companies like mine included, Eighth Light. I know they just sponsored someone last cycle. You can pretty much work anywhere you want to in the United States, and you're working towards being a full-time employee with us. Like we don't have any geographic requirements. And Ty, you've got a question?
Yes, quickly. So that the internship programs and the apprenticeship programs, is that support mainly given to the full stack side of it, or is that also available on the DevOps side?
I don't know how that's going to work for the DevOps side, because we are just starting the first DevOps course. Like they started last week. And I imagine that there will be something similar, like they're working towards getting people DevOps positions, like internships as well. And I know that previously, like we've had sponsors take Code Platoon students that graduated from just the normal full stack program, and then they went to teams that were DevOps. Um, so and we won't, again, like this is just the basics of JavaScript, so we won't get too far into like front end, back end, full stack, DevOps. But I will say that like the DevOps program is brand new, and the reason it's starting up is because there is such a high demand for DevOps, or basically developers that are capable of running DevOps. And for, if that's a new term for anyone, basically what you learn when you go through Code Platoon is how to write a web application. So the front end, what you see on the screen, the back end, which is the layer that you don't see, that is taking requests from the front end and retrieving information from the database and then sending it to the front end so that it can be displayed in a visual pleasing manner. And all of that needs to run on typically multiple servers. And if you get into bigger application, there's multiple servers running the front end, there's multiple servers running the back end, there's multiple servers running the databases. Like I can only imagine how many thousands of servers are running, say like Amazon's front end or like Facebook's front end, and then all the servers that manage their back end, all the servers that manage their databases. And the people who manage the infrastructure, because before it used to be IT specialists, right? Like we need physical servers on location and we got to hook all the wires up and what they call it racking and stacking. And a lot of that has gone away because it's being done through the cloud now, right? Like it's all at AWS or Google Firebase or Microsoft Azure. And so now there are DevOps engineers that are kind of this hybrid between being a software developer and being an IT specialist that are basically writing the code, or what we call infrastructure as code, to provision these servers and tell AWS to turn them on and off and what's going to be running against them, and moving them together in groups. And then of course the all important, again in the news, the security of it, right? And so that's what a DevOps engineer does, is they will still write code, but they aren't going to be writing JavaScript. They may be writing some Python, but they're going to be writing for a language called Terraform, or Ansible, which is how we tell basically these big cloud companies what type of infrastructure we need and what to do with it. And that is, as more and more moves to the cloud and more computing power is needed on the cloud, like DevOps is going to continue to be a very in-demand career. So, and I went through the full stack DevOps. Like I said, they just started the first alpha platoon for DevOps. It didn't exist. If anyone's thinking about it, I don't think you can go wrong with going through the DevOps program. I don't think you can go wrong with going through the full stack. Like either one's a great choice, and it's just what you're going to be interested in. And I mean, quite honestly, I've done some DevOps work on my project, and we all almost up until recently, almost all of the DevOps on the project that I work on for work has been done by software developers that have basically extended themselves into DevOps. And the client that we have has finally actually procured like a full dedicated DevOps team. So where we don't have to do it anymore. So even if you go to a full stack and you get out there into the real world, doesn't mean that you're not going to run into DevOps or DevOpsy things that you have to work with. Like we all bump into it every day. Michael, how often are graduates able to find a remote global position? They can work outside the US. So I definitely know that there's companies out there. I know one person in my group, when I graduated, went to, she was the spouse of a Air Force officer and was stationed over in England. And she pulled down a job that was like full international remote. She could work wherever she wanted to. And quite honestly, since the pandemic, like those jobs have become a lot more available. So, I mean, I don't have any like hot leads I could give you, like apply at this company or that company, but those type of jobs are definitely out there, and they're much more prevalent today than they were, say, in the start of 2020. But I will also say that depending on, and some people don't care, like, hey, I just want to write code, but some people are like, oh, I want to work in the banking industry, I want to work in the medical industry. A lot of times if you're working with anything that's sensitive information like HIPAA or like banking laws or something like that, working for a defense contractor like Lockheed Martin, Boeing are always trying to hire developers, then you become typically like more geographically restricted. Like my company doesn't care like where you work anywhere in the US, and they'll work with you if you want to work in another country, as long as like it doesn't cause some sort of like crazy tax burden for them. But because I'm a consultant, I'm actually working on a contract that requires a security clearance. So I physically have to live in the United States as long as I'm on this contract. And I could leave the contract and go find a different contract, but I like working on it. So even though my company doesn't have that restriction, my job within the company has it. So it's there's a real wide gamut of like what a typical workday can look like for software developers, because there's just so many different like we think of tech companies like Facebook and Apple and Google, but banks are big tech companies, right? Like the amount of infrastructure and software at banking institutions and insurance companies, all these things. So there also in Chicago, a lot of transport. So there's a lot of freight brokerage hubs here in Chicago. It's all software driven at this point. And so as you learn how to write code and you kind of shift towards this industry, medical is another big thing. Medical startups and medical billing and all the stuff around HIPAA and the security practices around that. Like it's just never, it's just like this unending army of people that you need to run a like modern tech forward company at this point. All right, so we've got so some programming experience to require you. So right, like we've got this intro to coding live, and then we say here's code Platoon, and then you're a software developer. We're all right here at the intro to coding live. So if you've written some JavaScript before or any other language before, be it Visual Basic or all the way back Basic, I think the first time I really wrote code was on a Commodore 64 out of a booklet that I was trying to program fireworks out of, and just kept getting like a line error code and like line 6,000 of the program that I typed, but couldn't save to anything because we didn't have the disk drive for the Commodore 64. And then I never wrote code again until I was like 40 years old, because that's how bad it damaged me. But if you've gotten here, you turned the computer on, you logged into Zoom, hopefully you got into Slack, hopefully you got into the Replit account. That's all the experience that you need to be in this class. Like we're here, we're all going to start from the very basics here together. All right. So myths about programming: you have to be a math wizard. You don't. You have to be an introvert loner to be good at coding. You just sit at your desk and code all day. Programming is boring. One programming language is better than the other, and you only need to know one programming language. So basically, these are all wrong. It's all kind of outdated stuff. You don't need to be a math wizard. One, your computer is a math wizard, so if you can figure out what type of math you're trying to do, your computer will help you along the way. The most difficult thing we'll get into in this class is maybe like floor division or remainder operations. So you will have to be able to work on a team and communicate well. So being a software developer, it's not just being a loner and writing code all day long. It is researching how to solve the problem, but also interacting with other people. You're going to learn how to pair program at Code Platoon, which is two people working on the same problem, right? And you're going to have to be able to give status updates. You're going to want to get out there. You're going to have senior developers that are going to be your lifelines when you're struggling with more difficult problems, and being able to say that I need help is going to be a big part of becoming a professional software developer. Because if you just sit there and suffer in silence, I mean, you can only do that for so long before, you're not getting anything done. So I know a lot of times people worry about like, oh, if I say something or I expose my ignorance, whatever, like I'm going to get laughed at, or like they're going to look down at me. For the most part, one, across the board at Code Platoon, you're like, everyone has been in your shoes. Like, I mean, I literally sat here 4 years ago not knowing how, like, trying to figure out how to declare a variable in JavaScript, which is what we're going to get into tonight, right? And I don't even know how many times now, the fifth or sixth time I've taught this class. I love teaching it. I love helping out. I love watching people get their new starts, get their wheels underneath them, go to Code Platoon, graduate, get a job like in the industry. It's fun to help everyone take their first steps with this. So I'm here because I like helping other people to learn how to code, because it has made a genuine positive impact on my life. And you there there's not a whole lot of things in your life where you say like, wow, this is better than what I was doing before. And I wish I would have figured it out when I was about 22 years old, 23 years old, getting out of the military, and not have flailed around in finance for 15 years before I decided to learn how to write software. Um, so your code can impact millions. It's not boring. For the most part, like your code will have a more limited impact than millions, but like I write code that basically is HR software that's used to track people. But I mean, I think about 500,000 people a year go through the software that I helped launch a couple of years ago, and have been maintaining and growing ever since. So it was kind of cool to get to see that stuff, and the fact that I'm helping the people who use the software. I'm making their life a better place, that they like using the software instead of the program that I replaced, which was cobbled together since the 1990s. And some people couldn't use a mouse with it anymore, and you had to keep a spreadsheet of codes, like 2-digit codes, next to your desk because it operated like it was still in the 1990s, where real estate for computers was very expensive, and you had to make decisions between like, should we have a 3-digit code or a 2-digit code, because that would impact performance down the road. And those are all things that don't exist today anymore in software to that extent. So you don't have to be a tech bro to be a programmer. Some of the best programmers in the world, all time ever, Grace Hopper and Ada Lovelace, are Hall of Famers. More contemporary, also Hall of Fame level, Sandy Metz. She's one of the best Ruby programmers on the face of the planet. So you, like I said, you're going to run into all sorts of people writing code. And we'll talk about that, and then talk about that in Code Platoon as well. So you'll use more than one language throughout your career. I went through Code Platoon, learned JavaScript, Python, went to my 8th flight apprenticeship, and because I knew JavaScript and Python, I had to learn Java, and then Clojure, and then Android Kotlin, and then finally Ruby. And now I have, for the last few years, I've been on a project working in JavaScript, which is turned over into TypeScript, which is a strongly typed version of JavaScript, which is a little bit more overhead to it, and a Ruby on Rails project, right? And when I'm done with this contract, I don't know what contract I'm going to go to next. So it could be another JavaScript Ruby thing. It could be a Java. It could be C#. I just don't know which direction it'll go. So odds are you probably, if you're becoming a programmer, you're not going to just work in one language for the rest of your life. So truths about programming, you only need to know, looks like I already covered all of this stuff. Sorry, I hopped a slide ahead. And programming is hard. So programming is hard. There's a lot to know, right? And we're going to try and break everything down into basic building blocks in this class, and learn how to use the most rudimentary building blocks, and then we're going to start stacking those blocks on top of each other to keep solving more and more complex issues. And the other thing too, so this is very important. There's a difference between knowing the syntax structure of a language versus knowing how to apply the logic to solve problems. I will screw up the syntax all the time, right? Like I will write something syntactically wrong, and I will get an error message, and what I was planning on doing didn't work the way I wanted it to, which is fine. Like trying to memorize a language, like all of its syntax, is pretty dang near impossible. But knowing how to apply logic to solve the problems, right? So if I know that I need a specific data type here, like I need an array here, versus knowing that I need an object, which we're going to talk about the difference between those two things, or when I should be looping and what the conditions of my loop are. If I know how to solve those parts of the problem, I can always go look up what the syntax needs to be, right? And I've been doing this long enough where I've got a lot of the basic syntax pretty much memorized, but there's still stuff where I'll just look it up because I mean, you have to. So as a beginner programmer, you are going to get frustrated, which is fine because I'm a senior developer and I get frustrated. That doesn't stop. People who learn how to write software and become professional developers generally are compensated fairly well. Like if you look at any of the industry-wide stuff, like software developers get paid pretty good money, but you're getting paid to be angry at your computer all day long. Things will very rarely work the way you want it to the first time. You're basically building puzzles all day long with no picture on the front of the box, and none of the pieces are the same shape. And there's multiple pieces that can fit into the same spot, and some of them work better than others. And it can just be like you're going to be wrestling with that language day in, day out, especially as a new developer. You don't know where to begin to even start solving the problem. So this is one thing that we're going to try and pick up in this class. So I'm going to show you resources and like where I look when I want to solve a problem. And you might think programming is not for you because you just don't get it. That's fair, but again, it's practice, it's repetition, it's doing, and some people are going to get it naturally. Some people are going to have to work a little harder at it. Like I said, I'm definitely on the part of the spectrum where I have to work at it. Like I said, I'm not a natural gifted developer, but you can grind your way through these things. So kind of the list of like who will succeed, like who won't. Like this is, I mean, kind of any job, right? Like it's no different for software development. So you're not making excuses. You like to learn things, that you're capable of going out there learning on your own. Ask lots of questions. Can do attitude, persistence, resilience, humility, humbleness, high emotional EQ. Takes advantage of resources, learn from other people's mistakes. So this one, learning, not just from other people. So I will say your old self is a person as well, just like your future self is. And so being able to learn from other people's mistakes, including your past self's mistakes. There's a joke in writing software about how you should never trash code that you're reading because you may have been the one that wrote it 6 months ago. And that definitely happens, especially when you've been on the same project for a while now. I mean, I've been on the same project for 3.5 years, 3 years, and I've definitely ran across code that I've scratched my head and like looked at who wrote it. It was me like 2 years ago, and I was like, wow, I was bad at this, right? And it wasn't that I was bad at it back then, but like you continue to grow. Like I said, tomorrow night when we start getting into some of these challenges are the most basic challenges that we can pick, and some of it's going to be a little bit difficult because you haven't seen it before. It's your first steps. You're going to come back next week and those same challenges that you were struggling with, you'll knock them out in a couple of minutes. And then the ones next week are going to be harder, and week 3 you'll be able to look at some of those week 2 challenges. It's the same thing. So we're gonna keep growing. So this stuff, again, it's just the opposites of this stuff. The one thing I will say is this is very important. So in software development, we're always going out there and looking at other people's code that gets posted in public forums. Like, hey, I've got this problem. Has anyone solved it before? Yeah, hey, I got this to work doing it this way. So it is not a bad to copy and paste code inherently, but it is bad if you have a problem that you don't understand and you just copy paste code into it that makes it look like it works, or maybe it works, but you still don't understand why it's working, right? Like that you don't understand that code. So you're going to have to go out and copy paste code, but a big part of learning is, hey, I don't get this problem at all. And then finding code that solves your problem. But now that you actually have a solution, go through that code and figure out why it works. right? Because if you just blow past it and move to the next thing and you don't learn it, then eventually when that software breaks down, you're not gonna know how to fix it because you never understood it in the first place. And understanding working code is typically easier than trying to understand broken code. All right. Yeah, and then wants the program to be done their way. Computer don't care. You can want it done any way you want it to, but the computer is going to have it done the way that it can basically understand it, right? So much of what we do is, and you're going to go through a phase of I have no idea what I'm doing to I know how to solve this problem, but I don't know how to tell the computer how to solve the problem, right? So it's like we've gone from not knowing anything to knowing what to do, but having a hard time grasping the syntax and telling the computer how to do it. And that is truly difficult, but it's a step in the right direction. And the next, as we move past that, you're going to get comfortable with basically taking baby steps with the computer to getting to more and more advanced syntax so that you can build programs that are capable of tackling more complex problems. All right. So intro to coding live schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're going from today, April 17th, all the way through Thursday, May 4th. 9 sessions total, 6 to 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. 6 to 7 p.m. is typically announcements, reviews, the nice material strategies, and solve the problem. 7 to 9, work independently or with a partner, solving coding challenges. So work independently with a partner or as a group. So we will do plenty of group work in here as well. And some of that I will let the class dictate. You'll probably enjoy pairing a little bit on some of the easier challenges, but once we get to kind of some of the end of week 3 stuff, I'll probably be doing most of that in class as a group. All right, so a couple of ground rules here. Nothing crazy. Respect your fellow staff and or respect your fellow classmates and staff. Really zero tolerance for talking trash to a classmate. That would probably be like the end of your attendance in the program. I'm pretty tough. I can take a beating, but try and be a little nice to me. No inappropriate jokes, and I know that fluctuates depending on the audience, and we've got a bunch of grizzled veterans in here. But when in doubt, like don't say it out loud. Do yourself a favor. That's like the key to success in corporate America. Like just be quiet. The big thing is no fake surprises, and this is like not everyone's run across this one before, but none of the oh wow, like I didn't believe you didn't know that, right? Like don't do that to people. It's fine. Like it's not a like you're not calling them dumb, but like it can be construed that way, and it's we don't need the additional commentary in class. We want to make this as conducive to learning for everyone across the board as possible. Let's see here. So any questions on any of the stuff I've covered up through here, or any questions, or anyone got any other thoughts on ground rules or how they'd like to be interacted with in class? Okay. Awkward pause means we move on. So, all right. So what are you going to learn? We're going to learn JavaScript. So language of the web. Java is not JavaScript. JavaScript was named JavaScript directly to rip off Java and to ride the success that Java was having back in the 80s or 90s or whenever everything was exploding. But just be careful, like Java and JavaScript are not interchangeable in a sentence because they are two very different languages that do different things. If you're writing web applications, you're going to need JavaScript, most commonly used language, and tons of resources out there for it. We're going to go over JavaScript fundamentals, so basic functions, conditionals, iterations, objects, and more. And we're going to start moving those into the basic techniques of JavaScript programming. And so let's go ahead and get started with that. All right. So what is a programming language? It lets us write lines of code to give the computer a set of instructions to perform to produce some kind of output. Output is text to the screen, creation of a file, etc. The computer will only perform exactly the instructions you have given it to perform. And let's see here. Before I dive too deep into this, it is 6:56. Let's go ahead and take like a quick 6 or 7 minute break here. Anyone can get some water, use the restroom, do whatever they need to do. I need to get some water. I'll probably lose my voice by the end of the night tonight. But yeah, I'm gonna drink some water or some tea here real quick. I'm gonna step away for about 2 or 3 minutes, but then I'd like to see everyone back at, we'll say 6:05 at this point. And we'll keep going with the rest of the tonight's stuff. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. So as I said before we dove too far into this, I just wanted to take a quick break, give my voice a rest for a couple of minutes before we plunge on. We'll probably take another break sometime around 8 o'clock for a few minutes as well. So what is a programming language? Lets us write lines of code to give the computer a set of instructions to perform, to produce some kind of output. Output is lots of different things: text to a screen, creation of a file, sending something to a printer queue, sending something to a fax machine. Like all of that is output. The computer will only perform exactly the instructions you have given to perform, given to it to perform. This is going to be our jobs as developers, is how do we take everyday things and write them in a way that a computer understands them, right? And that is going to be, as you become a professional software developer, it's like, how do I take these business requirements, what my client is saying, this is what I need the software to do, and be that I need to keep track of a person's height and weight, right? For a doctor's office, what are the steps that I need to say? I just need to be able to write the height and weight down in a specific pop-up box. Okay, now I need to break that down as a software developer and go through the dozens or possibly hundreds of steps to be able to accomplish that task. And then once we finish that and we test it, and we make sure that it works okay, we move on to the next part of the application, and we do what's called feature development. And so we find the feature that we need and we write it into the world. All right, so values. Every value is a piece of data or data type, and the data type determines how that value behaves. So some values are a number, so 86, 2021. Some values are text, or in JavaScript, we call them a string. So notice the double quotes here, the numbers don't have quotes around them. And some values are functions, and so on. Variables, and variables are how we store values. So variables are named label identifiers for storing values. Remember from math class, variables X and Y. There are 3 ways to declare or create a variable in JavaScript. Var, don't use anymore. All right, so you can still write var and it will still work, but we do not recommend that you use it. You will either use let or const, and let and const are similar to each other. With const cannot be reassigned as a constant. And if anyone has looked ahead in the slides, I did drop them into Slack along with the challenges. So those are in the Intro to Coding channel now. we say that we're not going to introduce replit until night 2, but I kind of cram it together and we'll do both. Anything I do in a replit at the end of the night, I will drop into basically into that intro to coding channel, and you will have access to it. You can come back and see all the notes that I put in here. All right, so we'll move through this here a little bit, right? So with variables, let, const, and var are keywords that let you initially declare your named variable, right? So let, and then a space, and then the name of our variable, and then the equal sign assigns values to variables. All right, so current year is the name of the variable. You must give variables a name. Variable names cannot begin with a number, but they can have one after the first character. And this is our value assigned to the variable. Its type will be a number. All right, so we can say, all right, so I have basically said, I'm going to declare a variable and I'm going to assign it a value. All right, and so my variable name is current year. The value I'm giving it is 2023. This right here is actually a shortcut, and it's a shortcut for doing something like this. All right, so I've declared a variable. It has no value right now, right? And then I assign it a valuable, or a value, not a valuable. And no, Ghostwriter is new. Verse, this is declaring a variable and assigning it a value all in one line. So if I hit run and I run my program, notice how nothing happens because I have not told my program to do anything. I've not told it to give it any output or to return any values. This window over here is my console. I can type things in here, but I can also move visual text output to my console. And the way that you do that in JavaScript is with a console.log statement, right? So I can say current year, and now when I hit run, I've basically, my program starts up here. It knows that I'm creating a variable called current year. I'm assigning it a value of 2023. It comes down to line 3 and it says, okay, I want to take this variable and output it to the console, right? So there is my output going to the console. And now, same thing, if I do this, does anyone want to take a stab at what I'm going to see over here?
2022.
Okay. Anyone else got any other guesses?
You know what? I'm sorry, error, right? Because it's not assigned, like it doesn't have a value.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think you introduced the variable yet.
Well,
Last year. That came
so-
before last year's, or you know what? It won't print you anything because you gave no value to last year.
Well, not having a value assigned is a value, so it is undefined, right? And you're both correct. You're both on the right track because basically my computer is reading this from top to bottom, line by line. It can't hop around. It can't think what I'm thinking or like adjust for where I may have done something wrong. It can only do exactly what I told it to do. And so what happens is I declare a variable, I assign it. I take that variable and I send it to the console and I get the value. Same thing, I declare a variable, but I have not assigned it a value. So when you declare a variable and you do not assign it a value, its default is undefined, right? And so then I take it and I say, hey, send this variable, the value of this variable to the console, and the value is undefined, right? And so if I take this and move it down here, now I've declared my value variable. I've assigned my variable a value. Now I'm setting the variable to the console and I get that 2022. And I don't know why it looks weird like that on the screen. That's crazy. Yeah, so I wouldn't put anything into that, but yeah, so that's how we could do this, right? And now I can shorten this up, right, and do it all on one line. There's no reason to do it another way in this instance, right? So there's my 2022. All right, so, and again, we can say right, so we're going to declare the variable, we're going to give the variable a name, and then we're going to assign it a value. Right, it's going to look like this, and that's how we break it apart. You'll have it here in the slide as well, but that is the most basic thing we can do in JavaScript is assign a value. One pitfall, and we're going to discuss this when we get into conditional logic. So in JavaScript, you're going to see a couple of different things here. You're going to see an equal, you're going to see a double equal, and you're going to see a triple equal. And then you're going to see an exclamation point equal and an exclamation point equal. And all of these are very different things. This one right here is the only one that is used to assign a value, right? All of these are all used in conditional logic. So single assigns a value. Double and triple equal are used for comparison. All right. And so let's see here. Okay, and I've already showed you the console.log. So console.log method, we can pass it one or more pieces of data, variables, values, and it will display it in the console. It returns undefined. All right. So same thing, I can do something like this. So I can say console.log 5 plus 5. Did they take away my cleanup button? Oh, I used to have a cleanup button here. Every couple of months when I come and teach class, they've made new changes. Okay, well, I'll figure about cleanup later. All right, so anyone want to take a stab at what we'll see in the console over here for this?
It'll give the variable 10.
So it won't give the variable 10, but it will give us the value 10.
Oh,
Right, so this is a variable. This is the value assigned to the variable. I'm not creating any variable here. This is not being saved in memory as a variable or anything like that. I'm just telling send this to the console, what's 5 plus 5? And it gives me 10, right? And it also works for multiplication or any other math I want to give it, right? And there I get my 25. And we can also do something like this. So we can say let A equal 5 and let B equal 5. And now we can say what's A times B, right? And we still get 25. And I can change this to 10. Right. And now we get 50. And same thing here. Like I could just say what's A is equal to 10 times 5. And if I just do A down here, I should still get my 50, right? There's my 50. And so there's different ways to do this, but this is the variable. This is the value assigned to the variable. And then console.log is just sending information to the console. That's all it's doing. And
But that's kind of a important distinction there, right? I mean, you kind of shot past it a little quickly, but when you just put console.log and put a value, that means the computer hits it and forgets it. But when you assign it to a variable, now it's in the active memory and can be used more than once.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So you will most likely never, well, it's the never say never, but you hardly use console.log in real day-to-day programming and production programming. Like we actually, like if you try and merge code in that has like an active console.log in it, we'll reject it because this is just a debugging tool. You will only use it in this class while you're learning to code, and you'll learn it while you're in code platoon because it's a effective tool for learning to code. But when you start writing real code that will like be going into production, will be part of real software, you won't use console statements anymore.
Okay, but even if you're not using the console statement, I guess the concept.
Yeah, if you don't save it to a variable, you're not saving it to anything.
Correct. If you just pump a value into anything without assigning it, that value is just used once and gone. It's reutilization is when you assign it. That's when you tell the computer you need to remember this value, right?
Right. I don't know that I would use reutilization. But yeah, I mean, we assign values to variables so that we can use them repeatedly in our program if we need to, or save the data elsewhere. Right. And because like again, as programs get bigger and we need data permanence, like right now we're just assigning variables and we're showing things coming out in the console. Eventually things will get saved to a variable, and then you'll save the value of that variable into a database field so that you can then call it up for later usage in a program. But yes, if you do not assign it, it is basically this right here. Well, all of these console.logs only exist on this one line of code. They don't exist before it, they don't exist after it. And same thing, if I just do 5 plus 5 here, the computer will come to line 17 and do 5 plus 5 and say it equals 10, but that's it. As soon as I hit line 18, it no longer exists anymore. I have not saved it. It is not a permanent part of my program. Is that good for everyone?
Yes.
Cool. And we're even going to get into the difference between console.log and return here eventually. So all right, so data types. So we've got the basics of data types. We've got numbers. So let age equal 34 again. Notice there's no quotes around it. We've got strings. So const first name is Tom, double quotes. Const first name is Tom, single quotes. Const first name is Tom, and backticks. These first two things are identical. This third one is similar. It's called a string literal. And we'll get into the difference between the double, single, and the backtick and here in a slide. So we then have Booleans, which are true or false values. And then we've got undefined, which is a variable has been declared, but no value has been assigned to it yet. So again, we declare something. Let's do this correctly. Right. And So this is declaring and assigning a value in the same line. This is just declaring it in one line and assigning the value in another line. And same thing, so kind of like when we did this, right? So we did console.log last year. Here we should get the 2022, right? If I move one up here, console.log last year, now I should get an undefined. Right, so it's undefined on this line. When it hits line 19, I assign it a value, I send it to the console again, and now we get the 2022, and now I can do something called reassignment. Right, and if I do yet a third console log, right, so I go undefined 2022 4050, right? So I'm reassigning the value, which is something I'm allowed to do when I have a let. It is not something I'm allowed to do when I have a const. So if I do something like this, I get my first error. So const last year, syntax error, missing initializer and const declaration, which is basically saying that because you cannot reassign the value of a const, you've got to have one up front. Right, so if I say this, and let's go ahead and comment this stuff out. All right, I don't see it over here because I'm not console.logging it, but notice how my error went away. All right, so now if I do it, there's my 2022. Now, if I come down here and I uncomment this line, and now last year is a const, it should yell at me again. All right, type error, assignment to constant variable. And so it's saying I cannot reassign the last year because it's a const, and that's how I've declared it. And does anyone notice something important in my error message, right? Like there's two important things. The first thing is telling me what I did wrong. Can anyone see the next part of the error message that'll help me out?
Where it says, I think it's saying line 24. I don't know if that's character 10, but line 24, 10.
Yep, you're exactly right. So I screwed up on line 24, character 10. The character count doesn't always help. Sometimes it's just like the last character in there. But knowing that line 24 is where I need to start looking for my problem is a huge help. So this is what I did to screw up. This is where I screwed up, right? And so two huge things when you're learning to code with the error message, and people will blow past error messages or don't read them and just trying to figure out without using help, right? Like don't do it on hard mode, do it on easy mode. So read the error messages. So I know 2410, that's screwed up. Okay, I'm trying to reassign up here. I look up here. So this is actually where my problem is, right? So I know I can't reassign a const. So if this needs to be a const, then I can delete this. But if I want to be able to reassign it, I can't be a const anymore, and I'm going to let it move back to let. When I run it again, problem solved. All right. And so we've got so for Replit, so for any IDE that you're using, if you're on a PC, it's control. If you're on a Mac, it's command. And then it's the /, which is right underneath the question mark, right? We'll comment. So when you comment out code, it is no longer readable by the machine, right? So it's just a comment. And we use comments as developers to pass messages back and forth to each other within the software. And you don't, like, some places have varying different policies on comments, and like you don't just like ask how people's days are going, but like if there's a particularly tricky piece of code that is hard to understand, you may go in and then comment it and give people some help and some basically like give them some breadcrumbs to navigate through your code so that they understand what's happening there. We use it in class just to basically turn code on and off that we're working with. If you're looking to do multiple lines of code, as you highlight more lines, and it's that same controller command /, it'll do whatever you have highlighted. So, but it's the command /, so, or control / if you're on a PC. All right. So the other thing I'll throw out to you is notice how your console is going to try and help you out with this, right? So if I say let name equal Charles, right, and I console.log name, notice how Charles comes through in white text and the numbers are coming through in gold text, right? And because it's the same thing, so I can say let string of number equal 2023. Oops, cancel that. Right, notice how I've got a gold 2023 and a white 2023, and same thing if I do
it's important to take a break to yourself and warm up with a Marie Callender's hot pie.
all right, so there's my Boolean value. Notice how that's coming through as gold. So the replit, which is my IDE right now, is trying to help me out. Right, and notice how not all of this is just in the same color text over here, right? So my strings are a different color, my numbers are green, right? My Boolean value over here is a light blue. So true and false are protected. They're dedicated Boolean values, and they don't all print out the same way over here. And so when you look at this, you can say, well, that's a string of the number 2023, and that is the number 2023, right? So it's just little things that the IDE is doing to try and make your life easier. Right? Null means there is explicitly no value. So null and undefined are not the same thing, right? So undefined means that no value has been set for it yet. Null means that the value is null. It is explicitly empty. There is no value to it. All right. So data types, we're going to talk about arrays and objects. So an array is a list-like object that stores values. All right. So this is where we're going to start to stretch our software development legs here a little bit. So we're going to hop into arrays. All right, so all right, so those are my cat names, right? And so let's give this a better name. So we'll say cat names. All right, so and just speak them into existence. So when we look at an array, we are storing values, in this case strings, so tech companies, cat names, whatever, into a basically a data type called an array. Now arrays have a guaranteed order, and we can use different built-in parts of the JavaScript language to do different things with it, right? And we'll have a whole section just on arrays, but real quick here. So I can say console.log cat names. And when I do that, I should get my entire array over here. Right, so there it is, Todd, Mo, Nugget, and PD. And now if I wanted to know, how many objects, it's easy, there's 4, right? But if we had an array with 50 million things in it, and being able to count it by hand isn't that great. So what I can do is something called dot length, right? And so now it's telling me that the length is 4, right? And same thing, arrays use bracket notation, and they are 0 indexed. And this is one of the things that will trip people up because we're human beings. We're used to counting from 1. Computers always start counting at 0 unless you tell them otherwise. So if we do something like this and we want to know, right, so Todd is at the 0 index, Mo is at the 1 index, Nugget is at the 2 index, and PD is at the 3 index. All right, so if I want to know what the first item is in my array, that is always going to be at the 0 index, right? So I'm going to put brackets here, and we call this box notations, or the box, because when you open it up, it just looks like a box, and 0. And now when I do it, instead of getting the entire thing, I just get the first value, right? And if I want to know what the last value is, right, -3, that's PD. And same thing, even though I have 4 items, remember I'm counting from 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, that's my 4. So if I do 4, I think I should get undefined, right? Undefined, because there is nothing there, right? There's nothing in that 4 slot. Now, if I take it and say put one of my foster cats in there, now I've got something in that 4 spot. All right. So, and like I said, we will have a whole class on just array stuff, and all the different built-in methods that we can get into with arrays. Let's see here. Any questions about this before I move on to the next section?
Yeah, you said we're going to go into it obviously more in depth. It's just an overview, correct?
Yeah, I believe session 3. Yeah, session 3, built-in methods and arrays. So on Thursday, we'll actually go through all of the different, well, not all of them, but all of the common built-in methods that we use with arrays. And then next Monday is going to be objects, and we're going to go into kind of the nitty-gritty with objects and the built-ins with that. So if you've got questions, I mean, feel free to ask them now. But also, if you're just like, oh, what's going on, don't sweat it. We're going to go over this stuff over and over again over the next 3 weeks. All right, so where was I? Okay, so objects are a structure of data that contain many values using comma separated key value pairs, or KVPs, right? So if you're in software and you hear KVP, so the acronym KVP, it is key value pair. That's what that means. And objects are a little bit more complex than arrays. And also, I should say as well, both objects and arrays can hold multiple different things, right? So like this is an array of what type of data am I storing in there?
Strings.
Yep. So this is just an array of strings. Right? I could say let favorite numbers equal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. All right, that makes up my favorite numbers right there. And where id. This is bumming me out. Yeah, because it doesn't do it on. It used to have a cleanup button. I've got to figure out where that went. So I'll be lazy and do it myself. All right. So this is now an array of numbers, and right. So this is basically a mixed array. So I've got a string, and I've got a Boolean, and I've got a number. And then this is not a number, this is an array with two numbers in it, right? So this now becomes a nested array. So in certain languages, so like strongly typed languages like Java or C#, you're not able to mix arrays like this. And you're also not able to just keep adding to the array or taking away from it. Like you have to specify what length the array is going to be, if it's going to be an array of strings, an array of numbers, so on and so forth. But with JavaScript, Python, Ruby, dynamic languages, you can pretty much throw anything you want to inside these. We're about to talk about it, but we can even throw an object in here. All right, and so now I've got an array with a string, a Boolean, a number, an array of numbers, and a object with a key value pair in there. And all of these are valid in JavaScript. So if I say console.log favorite things, all right, so there is my array with all the different things in it. Okay, so objects. Right, so they do not have index positions, they have key value pairs, right? So remember, I was able to get to the different parts of my array by giving it a box notation with an index value, right? So favorite thing 0 should just give me cats, and it does. And if I say so we've got 0, 1, 2, 3. If I say 3, oops, should give me my array with my two numbers in it. And if I do 4, right, there is my object. So you cannot navigate an object the same way that you can an array with an index value, right? So if I say right, and so an array is created with square brackets, a object is created with curly braces. All right, so now same thing here. I can say console.log and show me instructor. Right, and when I do this, I get the entire thing here. Right, and if I now, where again, I don't have an index position. So if I say something like this, basically it's saying undefined because there is no key of 0 in here, right? Like and there's no index position. But if I do something like this, right? So now we see Charles, right? And so you can also do dot notation with objects. All right, so that got me same. So with an object,
Are your options for the value pair limited to strings like that? Or could you put a Boolean or a number without the parenthesis, without the quotation?
for the values,
Correct. Correct.
it can be anything, just like an array.
Okay.
Okay, so there is so these right here are basically key names, and JavaScript is basically massaging them into a string. All right, but notice how I don't have the quotes around it. And I can put the quotes around it, right? So I still get Charles there, but when I do the quotes, I can also do something like this and make it basically like human readable in the key. But when I do that, notice how this is broken down here. And using dot notation, I can't put a space in the name of my key, right? Like this won't work. I'm going to throw an error because there's that space there and you can't do that. Now with bracket notation, because you're putting everything in quotes, you can always match whatever you've got going on for the key name, right? So now we're back to working again. And so you'll see me flip back and forth between them. There is no right or wrong way. But as general guidelines, I would say that when you're naming your keys, you shouldn't put any spaces in them because that allows you to use them this way or with dot notation, however you want to do it, right? And oops, no, what did I do? Because I got that there. That right. And so when you give your object keys, and we haven't discussed this, but this is camel case. So, and camel case is the typing style that we use for JavaScript. Python is snake case, where between each word, so a multi-word variable in Python would look like this. And in JavaScript, it looks like this, right? So this is snake case. Oops, yeah. Snake case and camel case. Then there's my favorite. Does anyone know what that one is? It's the best case name ever.
Yelling case.
You're close. It's screaming snake case. So yeah, that's screaming snake. It's just all uppercase. You use it when you do constants. All right. So and Loki, I believe you had asked about the different things that you can hold in there. So we could say likes to teach. And we could say true, right? And now we've got a Boolean value in there. Age 42. So now we've got a number in there. pets, right? So now we could do something like this, and we could say, we could make this an array. And again, same thing, we could say Todd, Mo, Nugget, right? And so now we've got an array of strings in here. We could say passwords, right? And now we could do something like this, where we say Gmail is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and what my Replit account is cheese, right? And let's see here, we'll say my Adobe account right is something random, right? And so now we've got inside of our object, we've got some string key value pairs, we've got a Boolean, we've got a number, we've got an array, and then we've got a nested object. And so we could say back here, we can just say instructor. All right, so here is the entire object right here, right? So we see everything, and we can do the same thing again. So this time we could say age, and if we run it, we get that 42 there. If we say pets, right? So there's the entire array. So if I wanted to see just Mo's name here, what would I need to add to line 69? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
Would you add, so following the index, you would put 2, identifier 2?
Well, so you're right on that. We need an index value. So if I want to see Mo,
1.
right? So I count to 0, 1, 2. So 2 would give me Nugget, but 1 should be Mo. So I should just be able to come down here and add a box after this. And so now this part tells me to access this object. This part tells me to access this key value pair in this object. And this is telling me exactly what part of the array I want to see. Right? And there's Mo. And same thing here. If I change this from pets to passwords, right? We take a look at this. Oops. Put that in quotes. Right? So there is my object with all my key value pairs in here. So if I just need my password for Replit, right? So same thing, instead of an index, I just need my next key name, right? And there's my password for my Replit account, which is cheese, which is not the real password to my Replit account, I don't think. But so this is how we start to navigate these different data structures. And as you can see in like arrays, you can nest arrays inside of them and everything like that. But with objects is where the vast majority of the data that you're going to deal with if you become a web developer is JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which basically looks just like JavaScript objects. And you're going to get arrays of basically these different objects, right? So like something that you would see in the real world is like in Code Platoon, if they wanted to see all the employees, right? So it'd be a array, and the first object would be like employee 1, right? And like so on and so forth, and then employee 2, and then where I'm just writing a name here, you would actually get an object with all of that employee's data in it. And so maybe there's 15 people that work at Code Platoon, and unless you get specific, if you just ask to see all the employees at once, you're going to get an array of objects with all the information for each of the Code Platoon employees, right? How it's stored. And so that is what we will be dealing with, and what we kind of work towards in this class, right? So it looks something like this, and this is empty, but you would just say like employee 1, employee 2, employee 3, and like all of their information would be in each of those objects. And so I need to then write code that goes into each of these objects and takes the name out, and the date of birth, and puts them onto a web page that's easily digestible for the HR analyst that's pulling up the information at Code Platoon, that's going through employee performance.
So looking at your line 73, do the
Yes.
keys have to be in quotes?
If you're doing bracket notation, they do. If I was doing dot notation, they would not. And again, I recommend that you use camel case for the names, or for the names of your keys, that you don't add any spaces. And again, I could go to dot notation here. I think I can do dot notation with nested. I haven't done it in a while. Let's figure it out. Okay. Oops. Let's comment that out. All right, so there it is. So you can do it this way as well. You can mix it if you want to. All right, like I'm still getting there, but and you can use whichever one you want to use. I would just recommend that once you start it, that you stay consistent with it. But yeah, I believe because it doesn't know what it's doing down here, right? It basically, you need to tell it it's a string. Like this should throw some sort of an error, right? So replit is not defined, because like it's looking at it like some sort of a function now, because there's no quotes around it. All right, does that make sense for everyone?
For sure.
Cool. All right, so, and again, we're next Monday, like class 4, we'll have a whole deep dive in as we get into more with objects. All right, so operators. So the first one is the assignment operator. And actually, before we kick into this section, it is 8:01. So let's go ahead and take another, well, I'm sorry, Michael, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question?
Never mind. It was the same question the Loki Sky Lizard asked before, so we're good. He did it. I forgot it was up.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, if you put a hand up or you say something in the chat and I don't answer early, feel free to stop me. I've got multiple monitors, but I can't always, I'm not looking at everything at once. All right, so 8:02, let's go ahead and take a 5-6 minute break. We'll have everyone back here at 8:08, and we'll get through the rest of the course tonight. But I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'll see everyone in about 6 minutes. All right, everyone, welcome back from the break. Let's go ahead and start with operators. And oops, sorry, just make sure I'm in the right spot. All right, so the first operator we're going to talk about is the assignment operator. So it is just that equal sign, right? So let a equal 5, console.log a, which is now 5, plus 4 should give us a return of 9. Again, kind of talked about this a little earlier, but easily confused with comparison operators, double equal or triple equal. But this stands alone on its own. We use that to assign and reassign values. This is going to be used for conditional logic when we start comparing things against each other, right? So All right. So if I run this, the last thing I see on the screen, oops, let E equal 5 because I've already got an A assigned somewhere else. So it's telling me it's broken here. Identifier A has already been declared. So if I scroll back up through here, I say, oh yeah, there's A equals 10, B equals 5. So let's just change this to C and to change this to C. All right, so then there's my 20. Also with console.logs, if you've got a lot of console.logs going, you can see I've got probably like 8 or 9 of them now. Console.logs can take multiple things at the same time. So I could do something like this and say like line 77. Right, and then comma separate it. And when I do it, I can see line 77. So the outputs the string line 77 I typed in here, and then it does the value, right? And so this helps me keep track of where my console.logs are coming from. Do the same thing here. 73. Right, so there's line 73, and so on and so forth.
Real quick, going back down to your let A equal, that was a mistake.
Mhm.
You could have, because with let you're allowed to reassign, but you're not allowed to reuse the let. So you could have, instead of saying let, you could have said A equals 5, and then it would have worked without an error.
It would have worked without an error, but it's like you want to avoid reassignment where possible, especially where like the first time that I declared let A equal a number, it had nothing to do with this example down here. And so in this instance, I'm better off declaring a new variable name instead of just reassigning it, because like it doesn't really make a difference in this file, but it's bad coding. Basically, it's just not the most efficient way to do it.
Okay, no, I was just, I follow you. It's not good standard by coding practice or best practice. I guess, and you clarified that for me, because I was just trying to clear in my head the concept between const versus let, and let allows reassignment, but using let again is not a reassignment, it's a redeclaration.
Right. And if I wanted, like if I was in a situation where I was reassigning it as part of the example, then I'd reassign it. But for the purpose of the fact that I want a new example and a new variable, yes, I could have reassigned it, but that's where we get into that's not a best practice, right? Like there's modern computers have, for the purposes of writing basic software, have unlimited memory. And it wasn't so, I mean, even going back, this, it hurts my heart to say this, 30 years ago to the early 90s, right? Where memory was much more precious. I think the first computer I got like in 93 or 94 was like a Pentium 380 or a pre-Pentium 386 with a 25 megabyte hard drive and 2 megabytes of RAM in it. And a couple years later, when I was a freshman in high school and I took drafting, they were running 286 computers with like an 8 megabyte hard drive and I think 256 or 512 kilobytes of RAM. And that was it. Right. And now you can go out and buy what are the little guys, the
iPads?
No, the little computers that you can buy.
Like an Arduino or something.
Yes, the
Raspberry Pi.
Yes, the Raspberry Pi. So you can get like Raspberry Pis with like 16 gigabytes of RAM on them now for like $100, right? And 30 years ago, we were using 286 computers with 512 kilobytes of RAM on it, and I mean, the computer, when it probably bought those things like in the late 80s or early 90s, we're probably shelling out $2 or $3 grand a crack for those things. Like, so it's just the amount of processing power that we have compared to like when these languages were created and like what they had to adapt to. Like a lot of the guardrails have been taken off. So like I don't have to worry about how many variables I declare. Like I don't want to just declare variables to declare variables, but I should never have to think to myself like, oh, if I declare this variable, I'm taking up too much memory. Like, and web development, it's not like we're not writing speed algorithms and competing against other like machines, things like that. Like what we're trying to do is make code as easy to read and reusable as possible, right? So that it lives as long as possible, because hard to read code or poorly written code is just going to get deleted and written over, hopefully. And good code gets to stick around. And so when we write code, we just want it with a thought in our head that our code is going to be easy to read, easy for the next person to read it, be it someone completely new or yourself a year or 2 years from now and you're coming back and reading the code. Like, you want to be nice to your future self. All right, any other questions on the assignment stuff? All right, so the arithmetic operators, all of these are pretty much calculator functions, except for you see here in JavaScript. So exponents are a double asterisk instead of the tent that we're used to seeing. So is that the Shift-6 key that you'd use in Excel for an exponent? In JavaScript, it's just two asterisks, right? So this is 3 to the 2. Multiplication is just an asterisk, subtraction is the minus, addition is plus, division is the forward slash. And this one is also maybe unique to some people. It gets called the modulus, but it is not truly a modulus operator in JavaScript. It's a remainder operator. And what that means is that if you do 10 remainder 3, or I think like the technical term for this is a modulo. So you can say 10 modulo 3, or I just say 10 remainder 3, right? 3 times 3 is 9, the remainder is 1, right? If we did 10 remainder 2, well, 2 times 5 is 10, the remainder would be 0. If we did 4, right? So 4 times 2 is 8, 8 goes into 10, there's 2 left over, the remainder would be 2. And so this will just show you the remainder of a division operation. All right, and so again, this is all calculator stuff. This is where we start getting into the kind of like the first real nuts and bolts of something specific to software. And so this is logic operators. And if anyone's ever played any of the games, or I mean, messed with hardware, and basically all computers are an ever increasing series of logic gates and logic operators, right? So we're going to start using this stuff to control what type of output a computer will provide for us, or a program will provide for us. So we've got equal or strict equal. So equal is double equals, strict equal is triple equals. And so when in doubt, always use strict equal. There will be situations that you may need to use equal, but you should always be trying to use strict equal. And let me just give you a quick example of that, right? So if I say, we'll call it we finished with C, so we'll say let D, let F, let G, and let H. All right, so if I say let D equal to 5, and I say let F equal to 5, and I say let G equal to 6, and I say let H equal to 5 in quotes, right? So if I say console.log d triple equals g, right? So I'm saying is 5 equal to 6? I should see a false here. Right, there's my false. So if I say D is strictly equal to F, I would hope that I would see it true, because this is the number 5, this is the number 5, there's my true. So if I say H, right, I still get my false. Now, if I take away the strict equals and just say equals, I get a true, right? And the problem with that is this is a 5 and this is a string of 5. So the value, both at the end of the day, come down to 5. But triple equal checks value and it also checks type. And most of the time we're looking to be as precise as possible with the programs that we're writing. So you'll always want to use triple equal, because if you don't, you could have some strings of numbers get thrown in there that will make it past this logic check, and then further downstream in your program just destroy things and make the whole thing blow up on you. Right. So when in doubt, right, and I say whenever possible because there would be certain instances where you would just use the double equal, but I do not believe that there are any problems anywhere in this class, or really anything that you would do in code Platoon, where you would require a equal in favor of a strict equal. It's not, you want to use it sparingly. And a lot of times when you think, oh man, maybe I need to use it this way, you probably don't. I just don't want people to get in the habit of it while you're new, because it may work in certain situations where this doesn't, but that's not necessarily a good thing. That means you're just getting the answer you want right now for the wrong reason. All right. And then I kind of flash these at the very beginning. So this is an exclamation point. In software development, that exclamation point is called a bang operator. So like an explosion, bang. And it means the opposite, right? So we'll see bang equals, which is not equal, or bang equals, which is strict not equal. And so that is the opposite of what's going on. So if I say something like is D triple equal to F, so 5 and 5 are equal, they should be strictly equal, right? I get a true. And if I take this and I flip the polarity on my true false, all right, I get a false. And this is saying, in English, it is saying D is not strictly equal to F. So 5 is not strictly equal to 5. And that is a false statement. So this resolves down to the value false. All right.
Looking at your chart, is there a bang greater than or a bang less than, or that doesn't work?
I do not believe that works. I've never tried it. But you would usually just want to flip it. Okay. All right. And yeah, so then greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. These are the same things that we typically deal with in math. So I can say, right, so can someone say in plain English what this is? What question am I asking?
Is 10 greater than 5?
Yep. And what's the answer to that?
True.
So there we go. There's our true down there. So, and don't be afraid while you're working on this stuff to write notes down. Right. And so we can put our notes in there. We can keep track of it, and same thing. So if I go like this, right? So now it flips it to false. And with the greater than or equal or less than equal, it's the same thing. It's just inclusive, right? So if I change this to 10 and I say this should be false, it is. If I say it's greater than or equal to J, and back to getting my true, because 10 is greater than or equal to. So any questions on any of the logic operators we've discussed so far? Okay, so here is where things will start to get a little dicey. So this is the double ampersand, or is basically a logical and operator, and the double, what we call double pipes, and that is basically right above your enter key. So it's the shift backslash is a vertical pipe. So when you're making notes or your pseudocode, when you go through challenges, one thing I would say to help keep your notes organized is when you're doing a logical and or a logical or, just put them in all caps or put something around them so that you know that it's something specific. All right, so let's go ahead and say, what did we have for the examples in here? We called 4, 2, and 8. Right, so if we say, so with an and again, if we kind of draw back on math, and is this is true and this is true. So if I say if X is greater than Y, And let's just go ahead, let's just start, let's build this out one layer at a time. So it's X greater than Y. All right, there's my true. And if I say is Z greater than X, this is also true. But if I say is Y greater than X, this is false, right? So right, so now we can start to change some conditions together, right? So if we want something to happen whenever X is greater than Y, right, we can just have something like this. And this only occurs when this is true. But if we need something like if X has to be greater than Y and Z has to be greater than X, now what we're doing is we're comparing both of them. So we still get the one true. What the computer is doing is saying it's going to evaluate this and say, is it true? And it's going to evaluate this and say if it's true. And if they're both true, then it's going to return a true, right? So if we flip this and say, is X greater than Z? So is 4 greater than 8? Right, we now get a false down here because this was true and this was false. And if one thing is false, the entire thing is false. Right, so we could throw this back to is Z greater than X, and that is true. And we can chain an infinite number of statements here, right? Like we can keep going, but is so this is true, this is true. And then if we say Y is greater than Z, so 2 is greater than 8, that's false, right? It all comes down to false. And this is how AND works, is everything that you're evaluating, each additional case of logic all has to be true. And so this one would be false, so that equals out to false, right? If one thing is false, the whole thing is false. Or is basically the it's if anything is true out of all of the statements, it will return true, because you're saying, is this thing true, or is this thing true, or is this thing true? And if one of them is true, it will return the whole thing as true. So we can do the same thing down here, right? So we can say, is X greater than Y? Right, so that's just the base one, so we get true. And then we could say, and is Z greater than X? Whoops, that's an and. Let's do double pipes, so there's our or. So now, is X greater than Y, or is Z greater than X? So X is greater than Y and Z is greater than X. We still get that true. But what if we take Y and say, is that greater than Z? Right, so is 2 greater than 8? We know this is false, but we still get a true down here because this is true. So with an and, Okay, and same thing with or here, we can keep going and going and going, and it doesn't matter which part of it is true and what part false. So it doesn't matter which one comes first. Like it doesn't care what order it's in. It's going to go through all of them. With an and statement, it does stop as soon as it gets to one false thing. So if you had 10 things here, and you'd usually take the thing that was like the most resource intensive or the thing that was most likely to be false and put it up front, because you don't want it going through all of these other things and doing all of this work if this is the one that's going to cause it at the end of the day to be true or false. And because basically if this takes a second to work through and this takes 10 seconds to work through and this takes 15 seconds to work through, right, and this is false, so there's no point to go on to the rest of it, it's good just to get it out of the way. All right, versus like there's a 9 in 10 chance that this one will be false, versus like if this one is only a 1 in 10 chance of being false, then maybe we move it a little further back in the progression. But that isn't anything at the starting level we need to worry about. It's just an oddity of how true or how and works. Any questions about and or? And again, you'll be seeing a lot more of both and or over this course. All right. So next is functions. And let's see, so we've got functions, control flow, iteration, built-in methods, problem solving. So we will probably make it to control flow tonight, and then on Wednesday we'll start at iterations. All right, so for functions, this is where we're going to start getting into the reusable building blocks that we were talking about. So what are functions? Reusable blocks of code that perform a specific set of instructions that you defined or that are built into the language. Functions can be defined to accept 0 or more inputs, what we call parameters, and in most cases output or return a value. To declare a new function, use the function keyword followed by the name of the function, which is the old way. When a return statement is encountered, the function exits immediately, returning the return value. And so this is the, like, I won't say the most common way of seeing it, but this is the old way of doing it, and it still works perfectly fine today. I tend to bounce back and forth just so you get exposed to all of it. But if you don't understand how I'm declaring a function one way, I'm more than happy to redeclare it multiple ways or just show you how it looks in the different format functions. So just like we don't use var anymore, the new way is using let or const. The old way of declaring a function in JavaScript was to use the keyword function. The new way is to use what's called a fat arrow function. And I'll show you what that looks like here in a couple of seconds. Any questions about this? And this is like the next step up in our journey here. Okay, so using a little bit of color coding here. So we declare the function, we give the function a name, just like we would a variable. Instead of let or const, so we're writing function and then the name of our function. And then it can have 0 or more inputs, or what we call parameters. So this one would have 2 parameters, parameter 1 and parameter 2. This could be empty. It could just be the parens. And then we're saying let value equal parameter 1 plus parameter 2, and we're returning the value. Anyone want to take a stab at what this function's doing?
It's oops, sorry.
You go ahead.
Okay. It's a function with the var name, and if something's invoking this function with name by calling name, then it's going to pass two parameters, parameter 1 and parameter 2, and the keyword let as the variable name value. That's going to take on, it's going to be assigned the parameter 1 plus parameter 2. So if it was 5 and 10, then it would be 15, and it would then return that value from the function.
Yep. So at the root, like, what is this doing?
Returning the value of those two parameters added together.
This is right. So it's just adding two values together and then spitting it out. Right. So it's just a little simple addition thing. Right. And so this is a lot of words just to add two numbers, especially because I could do something like this, right? So I could do console.log. Whoa, I'm spelling wrong here. Console.log 5 plus 5. And I know that's going to give me 10. Right, there's my 10. So why do I need all of this just to get to 10? Right, and that's what we're going to talk about. And that's
the beauty of function, going back to the definition, the reusability of it.
Yep. And so what, let's see here, calling or invoking a function to execute the instructions of the task. Right, so this is the same thing. Right, so if I call name and give it the values 1 and 2, right? So parameter 1 becomes 1, parameter 2 becomes 2. And here let answer equals 1 plus 2. So answer becomes 3, and then we return the value of 3, which is what we get right here. And so Logie was hitting on it, it's the reusability of it, right? So I can say function add, and I can say X and Y. And I can say let sum equal X plus Y, and then I can return sum. Right, and so now I can do add 5 and 5. So what do we think we're going to see here?
Ten.
Not a lot, because you didn't console log it.
Oh yeah, true.
Yep. So returning something from a function does not get it to the console. Right. And so that was me being sneaky. Someone caught on to me. I wasn't looking over at the screen. So whoever caught me, bonus points. But console.logging is not the same as returning. Right. And so this will throw you off too. So right now, I can't, like, when I run this, like, I'm getting my true from up here, right? So if I do the same thing, so line 113, right? That's my last console.log, right? So that's the last thing I send to the console. So now what I could do is I could say console.log sum, right? But, and I see my 10 out here, but now why this still isn't good is because if I do something like this and I get rid of my return, I still see my 10 in the console, like thinking I'm doing something right, but I'm not actually returning anything out of my function. So what we're going to do is you can use console.logs inside your function to see what different parts of your function are doing. But by the time you get to your solution, you shouldn't have any console.logs left inside your function. And what we're going to do down here is console.log our function call, right? So there's my 10. But watch this. If I don't return anything, I get undefined, right? So just like a variable, if I don't assign a value to it, it's undefined. Just like a function, if I don't return anything out of the function, the return is undefined. Another thing with a function is this is the last thing a function will ever do. So return is the last action a function will ever perform, right? So, because if I say sum times equals 2, right now I should see 6, or I'm sorry, 20, because I did 5 and 5. So it 5 times 5, or 5 plus 5 is 10, and then I took 10 and multiplied it in place by 2, which makes it 20, then I return it, right? So if I take this out, I'm back to 10. And if I come in after the return and I put this in there, everything looks normal right now. But notice how I still get that 10. There's the return. And I'm kind of surprised that it's not yelling at me. Normally it does, but again, they're always changing things. This should be telling me that this is unreachable code, and I'm not sure why it isn't. If we were to look at it in a real IDE here. So this is Visual Studio Code. This is what I use for work. This is what you'll use in Code Platoon. The sooner you can switch to Visual Studio Code, the better off you are, quite honestly. There we go. Let's do a new one. Code. All right, so same thing here. So I could say function add x and y, and then I could say let sum equal x plus y, and then I can return sum. And if I come down here and I say add 5 and 5, and we'll wrap this in a console.log. And I say node 91. There it is in my console. So this does the exact same thing that I was doing in Replit. This just is a virtual machine, small virtual machine on a website that allows me to run a JavaScript terminal. And this is me doing the same thing on my actual computer. And I don't know what's going on with it, but so if I say sum equals 20 and just try and reassign it, see how everything got dark down here, and then it says unreachable code detected. Anything after your return is unreachable. It does not matter if you've got the secret recipe to Coca-Cola written out down here, the computer will not do anything with anything after a return statement. It is the last thing that a function will ever do. And you may have multiple return statements in here, right? So we could say if sum remainder 2 is triple equals 0. So every even number will, so 10 with remainder 2 is 0, 20 remainder 2 is 0. But every odd number, 3 remainder 2 is 1, right? So every even number, we can return right? So now I have a function with two return statements, but every number I give it is either going to be even or odd. So this is still unreachable code down here, but now when I run my function, right, the sum is even. If I change this to a 6, so I get the number 11, the sum is odd. Need to add a little space right there, right? And so now we just use the remainder, strict equals, right, for comparison. And then depending on what this answer, so this is either going to be true in the case of an even number or false in the case of an odd number. And if it's true, we come into our if statement. If it's false, we come into our else statement. And this is just a very basic, we've got a variable, we're assigning it the values from the parameters from calling our function. We're going to use an if statement to do some comparison, some conditional logic. And depending on the outcome of our conditional logic, we're going to return one of two things, but we're still always going to return something.
Quick question on line 12.
Yes.
That again, I'm just trying to break things up so I make sure I understand different ways to skin the cat. That actually, is that kind of a shortcut? Could you do just the function, call the function with add 5, 6, and then the next line say console.log sum?
No. And that is because of scope, and we'll get into that. But so even within this, like if I do console.log sum, right? So sum is defined up here. This is local scope. This is everything inside the function. And this is global scope, which is everything inside the file, right? So now I get an error telling me that sum is not defined, right? Because it does not know what sum is because this console.log is outside of the function.
I thought returning it threw it out.
No.
Okay.
It is so what it does not throw it out. So like this is a variable that is only declared inside this function. And what happens is we can save the output of a function to a variable just like we would anything else, right? So I could say like I could declare this as a variable, right? So I could say let x equal this function, right? And then if I do x and I run this, oops, that is not defined. It's because it won't allow me to do this, sorry. But basically it's, let me just make sure x is not defined. Okay, there we go. So this is local scope. Anything in here is only visible in here, right? So if I say console.log sum, right, I get 11 because the console.log is within scope. And but like moving it out to here, out to global scope, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, we talk about scope in session 5 a little bit more, but again, it's just know that anything inside of a block of code is only visible in that block, right? And it's going to work the same way for loops when we start to get into iteration, which will be Wednesday night. It is 9 o'clock right now, so I don't want to hold anyone after. So let me go ahead and stop the recording here.